On this week's episode of Circles Off, we're joined by Eric Eager of Sumer Sports. Now, Eric's been on Circles Off before, but this one's going to be a little bit different. We're going to take the first half of the season, we're going to review it a little bit, why certain things are happening, and we're generally just going to discuss football analytics in the space, how they should be used in the NFL, and in betting. A lot to cover. This week's Circles Off starts now.
Come on, let's go!
Welcome to Circles Off, episode number 126, right here on the Circles Off YouTube channel, the Hammer Betting Network, and powered by Pinnacle Sportsbook. Rob Pizzola, joined by Johnny from BetStamp. How's it going? Quiet today. Quiet over here today. Number 26, anything? No, nothing. You know any 26s, Zach?
No, not off the top of my head, actually. That's a good... I didn't come prepared with the 26s. 27 for next week is pretty easy, but... Because there's one Leafs guy that I just think about immediately.
Yeah, 27 is simple.
I can't really think of 26.
26, the only modern day NFLer that I can think of. I don't want to say that has a tangible impact because a lot do, but Saquon Barkley wears 26.
Right.
But back in the day, Martin St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
26. Have you ever seen Martin St. Louis quads?
Yeah. It's nuts.
I don't know what he could press back in the day or what he could squat. Like we all see like the Nick Chubb squats that were like 600 pounds, Jalen Hurts or whatever. Yeah. Martin St. Louis quads are actually disgusting. Like you look at them and you're like it's actually gross.
He's so compact, right?
He's a small little guy, and you just wouldn't expect it. The guys like that, I've had to read, they have to get like all custom made pants because they literally can't pull their pants up over their knees.
Well, I mean, I'm not like, I obviously didn't have it to the same extent, but like playing hockey for a long time and at a higher level, you get the hockey butt, right? And then I had a problem for a long time with pants, and it was just because like your butt and your legs get strong.
Like, yeah.
And that was tough. What it was. And it had nothing to do with like being really jacked or anything. It's just you're in that skating position 5-6 times a week. Naturally, it starts to do that.
Well, you're using those muscles for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like St. Louis not getting that lower body from just skating. I'll tell you that. That guy was hit in the gym hard. Yeah. Sidney Crosby was also known for always having like really large legs. I don't want to share like specifics of a story once, but I do know of a story where Crosby specifically asks someone to like not get his legs in a picture because he was uncomfortable like having his legs shown in a picture.
I would legitimately have my legs in every photo ever if my legs looked like that.
To each their own. Listen, I'm a little skinny guy. I'm not squatting a ton or whatever. People might be surprised to know that I do exercise and work out, but I'm like I'm not ever in my life aiming for legs like that. A little bit gross.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
To each their own. Like I said. Now, to each their own with sportsbook selection. But number one in the land is Pinnacle Sportsbook. Might bet at a bunch of different spots. In fact, I'd encourage you to do that. But make sure Pinnacle Sportsbook is one of those spots. Everyday competitive odds. Bet smart. Bet Pinnacle, your trusted sportsbook for the past 25 years. Use code HAMMER when signing up, as it does help support myself, Zach, Johnny over here on the show. We can maybe upgrade his clothes next week. Get him some sunglasses. That juice box hat he's been wearing that for a while. You must be 19 plus. Available in Ontario, not available in the US. And please play responsibly. In all seriousness, if you're listening, you're going to have no idea what's going on, so I'll just fill you in here. I got a mannequin on my right over here. With Johnny over the course of the next couple months, it's going to be very hit or miss. He'll be here sometimes. He won't be here some other times. Still very much committed to bring you the best content possible here on Circles Off. But just so it's not awkward and people are like, oh, what's going on? It's really nothing. Just don't really want to share it, but he's going to be in and out. That's going to be the case over the course of the next couple months. But as we are committed to producing the best content, we got one of the best football analytics guys, if not the best, in the entire land. Our guest on this week's Circles Off is someone that you've probably seen before if you follow the Hammer Betting Network. Does some content for us on the Forward Progress YouTube channel as well. previously an episode on Circles Off, episode number 31. That was a long time ago. It was audio only. So this is the first time you're seeing him video here on this channel. It's Dr. Eric Eager. You can follow him on Twitter at Eric Eager _. Make sure you put that underscore at the end. The VP of Sumer Sports, formerly of PFF. We're going to get into a wide range of NFL discussion today. Eric, how goes it?
Rob, it's like I saw you last night at the Monday night game. It's been a fun season. I don't think the gameplay has been great, but it's been fun just kind of hanging out with you and the folks at the Hammer, as well as a privilege to be on the show for the second time.
All right, well, let's get right into it. And we are going to talk a lot of NFL. We're kind of at the midway point now. I want to get your thoughts on a ton of things related to NFL as much as possible. But we last had you on in November of 2021. It's been a long time. At the time, you were the VP of Research and Development for Pro Football Focus. Now you're the VP of Sumer Sports. Just for the people that don't know, what brought about the change for you?
It was a very kind of weird time for me, just because PFF was going through a transition. I know a lot of people have seen, they got, venture capital money from a company called Silver Lake. They kind of, prior to that, it was like a dream job for somebody like me who just wanted to analyze football, build products for teams, interact with teams, just kind of like a jack of all trades. And then like, when these things happen, like when, folks buy into your company, they kind of like obviously take it into a different direction. And it wasn't like I hated the direction that PFF was going. It was more that, I was somebody who liked to do a little bit of everything. I liked, doing content, obviously. And I liked, I liked working with teams, and I liked kind of doing a little bit of everything. And that was just not going to be a reality anymore. And so, I tried really hard to kind of stay the course. And then, the last summer, there was a lot of opportunities. Right around when Thomas Dimitroff got fired from the Falcons, that was somebody who I helped a lot when I was at PFF, with various projects. And so, when he got fired, I kind of built a friendship with him, kind of like, hey, if PFF is going to build a really good tool for general managers and not just analytics people in the league and not just coaches in the league, what was this going to look like? And so we kind of daydreamed over like what a product would be. And then sort of last summer, it was kind of one of those where it was like I was on the fence about staying at PFF, and Thomas, is the CEO at our company. And, enough things happened where it kind of made sense for me to move on. And then, it was also, fun because there was also, the Hammer was starting then. And so there was an opportunity for me to do some stuff with you guys. And so it just made a lot of sense. I have really PFF was a very special place for a number of years, and I don't necessarily know if it's the same, but it's something that I look back on fondly, but had to kind of end for me.
Okay, so walk us through your role now at Sumer, and particularly what the business model is for Sumer Sports as a whole. I see a lot of the content that you guys are producing regularly with your brand as well. It's very interesting. The show with you and Thomas is actually great. I would highly recommend that for anyone that's out there. But what exactly does Sumer Sports do? You guys are an analytics company, but it's much more than that. So describe it to the audience.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I mean, it's a very different flavor. For one, like just on the podcast side, like I'm more the host than the analyst to an extent. And we kind of let Thomas talk. We don't really talk about gambling on that show because of Thomas's background. And so it's much different than the PFF Forecast, which was my podcast with George at PFF. So we've kind of, we have two kind of sides to the company, kind of like a lot of companies, where we're building, tools for NFL teams to use their own IP and kind of leverage it. So PFF would always come in and be like, hey, here's a bunch of data we collected. Here's a bunch of algorithms we've built on that data. And here, and it was kind of a one size fits all. And it was, very innovative and it allowed teams to become more efficient and things like that. But what we're trying to do is say, hey, like, we're not going to tell you how good your players are. We want you to come and tell us what you think of your players. And then we'll try to take those raw materials and build things like value and trades and tools to use this, to build out, for example, today in the trade deadline, what was the Montez Sweat trade worth? What is it, a surplus to both teams given their states of play, or did one team get fleeced, et cetera? Like having all of those and having it be kind of agnostic of our own opinions and more kind of the opinions of the team. That's kind of the B2B side, is building kind of bespoke tools for teams using their own IP. And then on the B2C side, which is, the podcasts and the website, and eventually we're going to come out hopefully in the next week or so with a fantasy kind of like large language model thing where you can kind of type in, what is Michael Mayer's like projected yardage in this game, and go and use that for however you want to. That's kind of more of a forward facing tool where, again, we don't necessarily want to be in the hot take business. We just kind of want to be in the what is business and go a little bit further. One of the things I was always disappointed with at PFF was I thought the consumer product was the best in market for a long time. But if you look at kind of like most websites over the course of 4 or 5 years, how many new metrics are they adding? We want to be kind of that group that's adding new things like all the time, so that folks like you who are trying to find an edge betting or just want to talk about the league more intelligently, there's like a new thing to talk about like every so often, which I think is kind of missing in the space.
Very interesting. So in terms of like the addition of new things, maybe not from a pure product perspective, but what would you say are like some of the key trends or advancements in football analytics that your company's currently working on or monitoring closely? And I understand this is like, it's prying a little bit. There's, It's a competitive market, so you don't have to give away all the bells and whistles. But what's some of the advancements that you guys see coming down the road here?
I think there are a few ones. For me, using publicly available data, you can make a lot of advancements in modeling coaching, which I think that I tried to do at PFF. We kind of never really made it into a product because it was kind of like a fun little topic, but like really trying to formalize that and build tools so that either NFL teams who are trying to hire coaches can use them, or the consumer who's trying to understand, like, why is my team looking good in a bunch of different metrics but not winning, right? Oh, it's because they're giving up 0.3 win probability points per season in terms of, fourth down decisions, stuff like that. So that's one that I don't think a lot of people are really into, that I think has a real significant edge. The other one is, the behind the scenes for me, and this is kind of using tracking data, but it's also just using kind of hard worn, IP that I've generated from just like being embedded into teams at times, is development and how development factors into how you allocate your resources. So, you think about the Montez Sweat thing, right? Like he gets traded today to the Chicago Bears. The Bears are in a situation where they have more cap space and draft capital than they really know what to do with. Right. And like, does it make sense to sign kind of a young but not rookie deal edge player and pay him a lot of money? Is that a good use of your capital? And are you going to be able to develop that player better than a first round draft pick with all the variance associated with it? Should you ever draft a safety, or should you just go into free agency and acquire a guy for $7 million every single time? Like, there are tons of like low hanging fruit questions that I think were pretty good. Like the average, I think, football fan who's pretty sharp, like kind of gets it, but kind of putting that all into formal logic and model based stuff, to me is a really enticing and challenging and fun thing to work on every day.
So on the B2B side of things in particular, with Sumer working directly with some NFL teams, is there a particular like success story or some sort of case study where Sumer Sports Analytics in some way had a significant impact on a football team's performance or strategy? And obviously, I'm not asking you to name the team or anything like that, but if we could get into some sort of specifics of how you would directly help a team, that might really give people a glimpse into what goes on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I can give out some like actual examples at PFF, because like the time horizon's gone away. Like, in 2018, this team was coming off of a divisional round matchup, Super Bowl 2 years ago. They were not going to be able to retain a guard and a wide receiver at veteran money. So they came to us and said, hey, given our scheme, who is the most optimal player in the draft at this position? Who's the most optimal player in free agency at that position? and we gave them Calvin Ridley and Brandon Fusco, who they ended up signing and drafting. Ridley, by the way, just fit their offense better than DJ Moore did, and DJ Moore went slightly before, but that was and we built an entire product off that, basically where you could go in and toggle through scheme related stuff. So how often do you run inside zone? How often do you run outside zone? And running backs and guards, for example, Brandon Fusco was a below league average guard if you took his average data. But if you just ran outside zone at a pretty high clip, he was actually above league average. And so we did that in a very bespoke way at first, and then we codified it so that every team that bought the upsale of PFF's product could use that. That was kind of the start of a lot of the cool ideas. Just a team asking a really good question, and knowing that the data is probably rich enough to answer it, and just trusting us to have that answer. I think most recently, at Sumer, we just have teams, for example, that are on their bye week that are just reaching out to us and being like, look, our red zone efficiency is awful. What kind of plays can we what do we need to start doing? And that's a really interesting question. Or, even to, and this is kind of, I'm not going to say the names, but even to the point of hey, I've got a number of calls that basically hey, we're going to make a trade with this team. Other than these two players, which ones do you want? And they go with it a lot more than that you would expect, from somebody who's not in the building and doesn't have some of the information medically, for example, that they have. So it's just stuff like that, where it's it's been really interesting to look at the evolution of teams and the decisions that they make, and where they think they're weak, for example. And that's really where they're coming to ask you some questions.
So that was a very interesting answer. And there's a lot I want to unpack there. You talk about the red zone efficiency. We're going to get to modern day NFL here shortly and go through the first half of the season and some stuff that we have noticed, or I have noticed. I want to get your opinions on that stuff. The Brandon Fusco situation is very interesting to me because that's the edge that I think I have from a betting perspective nowadays in market, right? So many people are fixated on, here's my power rating of this team, here's my power rating of that team. Now they meet, give me home field advantage, maybe a bump for bye week or extra rest or whatever, and they're there. And I don't know how many people, I'm sure it happens way more than I think, because there's a lot of pro bettors are not public with their methodology or anything like that. But I've really gotten into the weeds on matchup versus matchup over the years, and I really think that stuff matters. So all of that is really interesting to me. I'm curious, in terms of an unrealized edge that you think analytics can solve in the next few years. One that's not on the radar, of most people right now, but something that as a football analytics company, you guys are preparing for, something that's coming down the road that you think could provide an unrealized edge.
Yeah, it's the big one, and I know that this is probably one that's the holy grail for you, because it gets even more to the point of what you're talking about in terms of styles make fights. But I think there's two problems. One of them is how space is used. So when you think about tracking data, one of the papers that myself and my colleague Tej Seth wrote was basically looking at the interplay of how much linebackers bite on play action, right? So, we had this metric called bite distance under expected, which basically was how much, given down in distance and all this stuff, how much did they bite on play action in terms of yards towards the running back? And looking at that relative to how well that they moved towards the running back when it was a handoff. And you could see for most players, there was a trade-off. If you were good at one, you were bad at the other. And then you had these unicorns like Dante Hightower, who ran to the running back really well, but also when play action happened, they were very discerning. And so you're okay, I want to find that. And to me, how space is used is really when you think about old school kind of non-analytics scouting, it's an old scout watching a player and looking at some of the things that's really hard for us to codify as analytics people. And the tracking data has at least given us a fighting chance to sort of come up with these traits in a very repeatable way, so that we can look and say, oh, you can classify oh, that guy moves his hips really well, or that guy like the one thing I noticed when I was looking at tracking data like 3 years ago with my colleague Timo Riske at PFF was looking at literally like the evolution of space occupation by secondaries and receivers. And what I noticed, and this is, funny because teams were asking about JC Jackson, and I was just kind of like, I just don't know if that's a good bet, because it was like in that Patriots defense, Gilmore quantifiably took up more space, or he was responsible for more space in that defense than JC Jackson was. And so opposing quarterbacks had to face a weird conundrum, which was, do I throw to the bigger space, but it's covered by a better person? Mm-hmm. Or do I throw to a smaller space that's covered by a reasonably decent player? And they would always throw it to the smaller spaces, but then those get tipped and those get intercepted and stuff. And so Belichick was truly like a genius in the way that he kind of like hid JC Jackson. It's sort of like the old Moneyball, or Billy Koch of the Oakland A's, were like, they had their like third best reliever save games and like trade him, right? And like that's essentially what the Patriots were able to do. So like to me, it's that it's how do players use space, and then another big one, and I'm assuming you deal with this a lot with the analysis you were just talking about, but how to deal with low sample events, how to deal with new coaches, how to deal with all those things where you need like pretty solid Bayesian statistics to really understand, if entropy and things like scheme, like uniqueness and surprisability and all that kind of stuff, because a lot of these problems in football, especially early in the season where there's more of an edge on NFL, it's like you really got to be good at handling small data problems.
Very interesting answer all around. I still can't get over the bite size over expected metric or under expected. There's like a million metrics for everything nowadays, but yeah, I mean, that's a really good answer. Like, for people who listen back to this might not be directly like a betting conversation. It might be like, go out and bet. Like, this is a very different conversation. But those who can think about the game in this way, there is such a large application from a betting perspective of all this stuff that flies under the radar. So I kind of want to get into a lot of this stuff with what's going on in the NFL, pick your brain on it, and hopefully those who are watching or listening might be able to take something away from that and be like, oh, that's pretty cool, or this style of thinking is some way that I should approach the game in the future. Before I do, though, last thing I kind of want to do in wrapping up like sort of like the introductory segment is there's a lot of people that really respect you in the space. I'm one of those. I think that you're sort of an institution when it comes to football analytics. And I'm not just saying that because you're a friend of mine, but that's the regard in which you're viewed in, aside from the Kansas City Chiefs fan base who calls you a homer all the time, aside from them. But there's a lot of people out there who are looking to break into the space in let's say like the field of football analytics. So what advice would you give to an aspiring analyst or professional that's looking to one day enter the field of football analytics?
And I'm not a professional bettor, as I've said a number of times. I do think that betting my own opinions has made me better, and I think so. There's educational research. I think I said this last time I was on the show too, but like back when I was a professor, like I was starting to bet. I read a paper where it was like you learn a lot more. So it was giving professors advice on how to essentially engage their students better. And one of the easiest ways was to give them things where they had skin in the game. And so like every single Sunday, right? Every single island game, right? All this stuff when we're on, we don't really even talk about betting that much on the Hammer when we're on those live streams. We're just kind of talking about the game in ways that I think we're just trying to like poke at the edges of the game of football and try to figure out something new. And I firmly believe that a lot of all the money is won in markets and all this stuff on the tails, and all the money is lost by not understanding the fat of the distribution, right? Like, and that I think that's pretty true everywhere. But in order, I do think to motivate people to get into the fat of the distribution and really understand the game of football, I think they got to be excited about one of the edge cases. So I think to me, if I were advising somebody like my colleague in the other room here, Sean Clement, he worked for the Dolphins, worked for the Ravens, now works for us. He like started a blog about punters and like literally went from A to Z on like everything analytical about punters. Right. And like that might not necessarily be valuable from a betting perspective or whatever, but it is really valuable from the perspective of getting in there, having a hypothesis about football, testing that hypothesis, and really, and really understanding something deeply, because that exercise once, to me, applies to a ton of things, right? And so my advice is really like, I mean, coding's great, and you do need, and I wrote a book, the Football Analytics of Python and R, for O'Reilly. Like, I really do have a heart for like trying to teach people how to do kind of the introductory stuff of football analytics. But to me, that's not even close to as important as have something you're passionate about in football that you have to learn the skill set to solve, because that process will be so valuable to eventually kind of like understanding the league more holistically and not making a lot of the same mistakes that, frankly, people like me have made early in my career, where I think I understood the tails of football really well and frankly messed up on the fat of the distribution. And, when you look at old predictions that I've made, like that, they certainly are there, and you look back and you learn from them. But they're invaluable lessons.
That's really good advice, generally speaking. And I think passion in like your subject matter goes a long way. I really wish Johnny was in studio today with me, because a whole blog about punting is something that would really get him excited. We could probably go for the next half hour. I don't know if you know this, but he's ranted before on like punting being a huge hidden edge in the NFL, and how there's actually like significant differences between having a great punter and a bad one. I don't necessarily disagree. I just find it extremely funny how passionate he gets on that subject. But let's switch over into modern day NFL, and the very significant thing, like the thing that everyone has noticed in the first half of the season this year, is that scoring is down. NFL games are averaging 43.6 points per game this season. That's on pace to be the lowest mark since 2017. It's the lowest mark at this point in the season since 2006. So 17 years ago. What's going on? What's going on in this league? Why are we not seeing scoring? And furthermore to that, can we expect this to continue going forwards?
It's interesting. So I went through the data, and actually it was a fun exercise to do this, because I write a Friday column at Sumer every week, and I kind of hit around the periphery of this, which is you look at series success rate, which is like the percentage of series where you get a first down. In 2020, the pandemic year, is 72%, 71% in 2021, 70% last year, 69% this year. Year to year, those like are not that discernible differences. When you look at success rate, you look at pass rates, for example. Last year, teams passed 57.6% of the time. This year, it's 58.7. 58.7 is about what they passed in the pandemic. Passing success rate this year and last year are about the same. They're both about 44%. The EPA per pass is a little lower. It's 0.03 right now, is about 0 last year. All of those, I think, the EPA thing is a big deal, but I think part of the reason passing EPA isn't as high is because teams aren't in the red zone as much. And so there aren't as many like actual passes. The one thing that really trips me out though, Rob, is rushing EPA. Like we were talking like this entire time, everybody's like, oh, running's going to come back. This whole thing is cyclical. I wrote an article on New Year's Eve in 2020 about like when I was watching, and again, this is like a part of that advice bit. Like I was watching teams and I'm like, you're trying to run dime, but your defensive linemen suck. And they're getting pushed off the ball. Like I know he was a Cowboy for once. I went to a game where Le'Veon Bell rushed for 170 yards against the Chiefs, and it was because they put Daniel Sorensen at middle linebacker and some other guy that I've never heard of, the other middle linebacker. And Dontari Poe was just getting pushed backwards. And it was just like the run fits were so horrendous. And so I wrote an article basically was like, look, if you have a very sturdy defensive tackle against the run, it's going to create box counts that are favorable to you. It's going to create pass rush situations that are favorable to you on later downs because you can stop the run. And like that has matriculated its way through like NFL circles and like talking points and stuff. And I finally think that it's hit. Like rushing success rate last year is 43%. EPA per rush was like negative 0.01, which is, perfectly acceptable for the run game in general. This year, 41% of rushing plays are successful. Negative 0.04 EPA. That's a drastic drop. But additionally, the crazy part is teams last year against box counts of 6 players or less averaged plus 0.03 EPA. So if you ran against a light box, you were being successful more often. Oh, sorry, it's not quite that true, but your average EPA was positive.
Yeah.
To this year, it's 0. So like the average play against 6-man boxes running the football is a neutral play. So the opposing defense is giving you the run in theory, and teams are taking it about the same as they have been historically, and they're just not getting it. And we talked about this last night on the show, but it's like, is that because running backs are bad? Is that because offensive linemen are bad? I think it's because defensive linemen or teams have become more awake to the fact that you do need to have guys that can rush the passer at edge, but you need a guy in the middle who can stop the run defensively. And that is a huge edge in football where you can still play 5 or 6 defensive backs. This year against 7-man boxes, so like normal boxes, so like early down boxes, teams are far more inefficient running the ball than they had been last year. And it's like a 38% success rate against 7-man boxes this year, which is – so that extra man in the box is just so much more valuable than he had been in the past. And my hypothesis is that the defensive linemen are just doing a much better job of keeping offensive linemen off of those players.
Do you think that there might be a dynamic shift in the draft as well? So like, I'm not a big draft guy in the sense that I don't obsess over it like some other people do. But for a while there was a lot of like run stopping defensive linemen that were just dropping in the draft because everyone realized this is becoming a passing league. This isn't as important. In recent years, have we seen that kind of shift back where teams are like, maybe we actually do need like a big plug in the middle of that D line?
Yeah, so like in the 2021 draft, right, Christian Barmore was a round 2 player, and he was the highest defensive tackle taken. Sometimes that's because of scarcity and the sort of way that the market dynamics are. Sometimes that's because of philosophical shifts. Jordan Davis probably would not have been a top 15 pick 5 years ago. Like, let's be honest. And you know, I think like even talking to people like Mina Kimes and, you know, people who are talking about football for a living, they're like, well, he doesn't have an effect on the passing game. And I'm like, well, wait, he actually does, though, because if you force 2nd and 8, like you do have an effect on the passing game by shifting the expectation on late downs. And so you saw that. You saw Travis Jones, who was kind of like the poor man's Jordan Davis, the really sharp team with the Ravens taking him later in the draft. This year, you see a little bit more of that as well. And you see now, like, it's going to change because guys like Young and Sweat and those guys are going to get bigger deals. But the majority of defensive lineman contracts over the past, 18 months or so that are kind of that bigger variety are going to the Quinnen Williamses, the Javon Hargraves, the interior players that have really, seen their value skyrocket, especially the guys that can do both, the pass rushing and the run defense. So, yeah, I think it's been, 15 years ago when everybody was running the cover 3, I think the most important defensive lineman was that 3 technique, right? The Booger McFarlands and those guys. And now I think it's more that nose tackle.
Also of notice, or notable, I should say, in the NFL this season. Maybe not that notable, but something that is definitely of interest to me and that I've picked up on. Over the years, we've seen changes in-game decision-making. That has just happened. One of the changes we've seen is the going for 2 when down 2 touchdowns and trying to cut the lead down to 6 instead of kicking a field goal and then going down 7. A lot of coaches have adopted this method, but sometimes I'm betting games, and this has implications for betting as well, when coaches are going to make decisions like this and not, especially when it's covering a point spread. You have guys like Bill Belichick, Ron Rivera, that just don't do it. Is this a generational thing? Like, you're much more in tune with coaches than I am, having worked directly with some teams in the league. It seems like there's this new wave of young talent and like coaches in the league that are innovating a lot more. They understand the math behind the decisions that they make. Is it inevitable that we eventually reach peak efficiency in decision making? Like, or is this because there's still like this old school element to the NFL? Are there still going to be teams that are just stuck in this mentality for a long time going forwards? Like, how soon do we get to where the MLB got to, where 3rd time through the order, we know that, pitchers' numbers are going to get much worse. Let's go to the bullpen. Like, they understand that shift in another sport. Is the NFL on the verge of that, or are we still far away from that?
It's going to take a while. I think, for one, the game evolves faster than the sample size grows. And that, to me, that's the big promise of tracking data, where, before we would have, 270-ish games a year, 70 plays per team per game, 16 games a year. And that's just not a lot when teams are evolving. Now you add to that, one reading every 10th of a second, like, it's adding to the sample size. So that's good. But the game is still really low sample. I always say that to get success, and I wrote it in 2016, there were no teams in the NFL that went for fourth downs when the model said to go for it more than 50% of the time. And in 2021, the last time I checked and wrote it up, it was more than half the teams did it more than half the time. So there's a significant evolution, and the analytics were winning. I think a lot of that was Doug Peterson, right? In the 2017 season, the Eagles went for seemingly every fourth down where they had an edge, and they were successful on almost every one, including 2 in the Super Bowl. You need some high-profile victories for the thinking.
They were also, sorry to interrupt, Eric, but I think that they were also, like, that was a time where teams started just going for 2-point conversions more regular. Yep. Tomlin was one of those guys. Of all the coaches, I can't believe Tomlin was on the forefront of it. But there was like a change just in general at that time.
Well, there was a game against your Cowboys where I remember it was like 4 or 5 times in a row, and Dallas ended up winning that game. But it was very jarring when you started seeing teams do that. And I think that going for 2 down, so just to get to the point of, like, fourth downs, I think we're starting to get there. There are obviously the Michael Lombardis of the world and the people who want to gnash teeth every time it doesn't work. I do think that there's a real question to be had about whether these teams prepare good plays for fourth down, and whether, Andy Reid runs a fullback dive to, and that kind of thing. But I think, and there's a real question about kind of like those models. We're going to talk about a few of them I think later, but there are uncertainty issues there. But in a lot of these cases, the edge is unmistakable, including the going for 2 when you're down 8. I think for a lot of us that watch football growing up, the broadcast really did have an influence on the way that we think about the game subliminally. So I'm not even thinking about going for 2 down 8, but like going for 2 down 9 is a plus EV move. And the broadcast absolutely doesn't want you to do that, because if you go for it, you miss it, you're down 9, then everybody's turning off the TV. And so the allure of being, in the game is certainly matters to them. And I think that also contributes to a little bit of the divide in the young guard versus the old guard as far as in-game decisions. Anything that's plus EV but also has a high bust probability, like the people who have made their money because of longevity in the league, like there's just a lack of incentive necessarily to mess with that, right? Like how many, if a guy like Bill Belichick goes with the flow and makes a bunch of decisions that are like suboptimal by a couple percent, it's going to take a long time for him to not have his job anymore. Whereas other people may have more of a throwing caution to the wind type of thing. We all saw what happened to Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly went 10-6 with Nick Foles, and then 10-6 with Mark Sanchez. And the moment he was like 6-9 the next year, they couldn't boot him out fast enough. Like there is an incentive to go with the grain, and I think that that's probably more of when you think about longtime football people who didn't jump the line. Like I think of myself as jumping the line with my skill set. For people who had to go through the process of being a scout or being an entry-level coach, padding every game, being a lower level position, getting all the way to the top, like there's a huge pull from that perspective on somebody to just, to favor longevity. And it's just a different objective function.
It's really hard for me to understand the mindset. It is just like as someone who grew up, being very good in math and studying statistics, it's just hard for me to get into that mindset, especially when you see like all your colleagues, all your other coaches around the league starting to move this way. Like I'm sure this data has been presented to Belichick and to Rivera, and it's just honestly, it's just simple math, right? I remember back in the day, Rufus just actually drawing it out on a napkin and posting it to Twitter. It's like, here's like the probabilities. Yeah. And, you know, your goal is not to go to overtime. Your goal is to win the game. And it's just hard for me to get into that mindset. But speaking of getting into that mindset, it's very topical. We have to discuss it. Recently, Brian Burke of ESPN Analytics said this about Tyreek Hill. And I quote, "He's a great fit for KC and now Miami, but he's not a Diggs or Jefferson or A.J. Brown. He's in a great situation. If teams could redraft all the wide receivers, I doubt very seriously he'd be taken in the top 10. In terms of like a like to retweet ratio, this is off the charts. You know, he doubled down on this and said, you know, people are obsessed with counting stats. Can we discuss without yeah, I'm not here to throw him under the bus completely, but it has to be discussed. Can we discuss how someone might arrive at this conclusion first and foremost? Like, clearly he believes there's something scheme related to Hill's success. How do we separate talent from scheme?
It's not easy for sure. And I do think that there is a good lesson in terms of, you know, with all the stats, you have to interrogate them, including your own. Like, I think about PFF wins above replacement. I think I'm like, am I really setting the replacement level properly, you know, back in the day? And that was one of the reasons why it took me a year from like when I started sending it to teams to send it publicly, because I knew it was wrong. Every single model is wrong, right? And I know our friend Diggs would say, you know, all models are wrong, but you're not even trying. I think that there's like there's an element of like, we all know, everybody knows, you know, that there are going to be some games where your implied probabilities are not correct. Like, that's just part of, and I think and I like Brian. Brian's a good friend. We go to Army Navy every single year. And I like him a lot. And I think he's taught me a lot. So I'm going to tread lightly here. But like, I think where he made the biggest error was not and this is where I'll defend. I don't like when people go out at, you know, like take a lot of effort. And I know he's been working on that for years. Take a lot of effort, produce numbers, put it out in the public. And for the most part, I think 80% of those numbers are fine. And there's probably predictive power in them. But because Tyreek Hill is 16th, it's like they're going to bag on him. I think if you get to that point in the discussion, I don't actually think Brian Burke's a bad guy. I think where the problem becomes is it's like, instead of just writing it off and being like, look, some models are not going to be able to capture, like PFF WAR during Lamar Jackson's rookie or during his MVP season said he was a win and a half less valuable than Russell Wilson. That's wrong. Like, I made the numbers. They're wrong. Like, the reason why is we don't have a historical. When Michael Vick ran for 1,000 yards, Rob, in 2006, 70% of those yards were scrambles. So even in like the PFF data, they would be a passing play classification, not a rushing play.
Right.
When Lamar ran for 1,200 yards as a quarterback in 2019, 66% of those yards were on designed runs. We don't have the context to build a great model for how valuable that it's. Shoni Ohtani type stuff, right? Yeah. Where, you know, Travis Hunter with wins above, you know, we had. I'm interested. I don't have access to the data. I'm really curious how much PFF makes Travis Hunter in terms of wins above average as a college player, because it's a Shoni Ohtani problem. It's not, Shoni Ohtani is not a DH that pitches, right? He's a pitcher that hits phenomenally both. And it's like, you just don't. So how to me, and maybe it's just because I'm a humble guy and I've gone through it, right? Like I've made mistakes, and I've certainly from a modeling standpoint not been perfect. And, you know, there's, like I said, I all models are wrong, but I am trying. The thing is like, could you just say like, look, Tyreek Hill is kind of a one of one player, and our model is not going to be able to capture that all that well? Like, that's where I think that all the errors happen. I don't think the models, frankly, like, I have to interrogate it a little bit. I think that it might be an improvement on some of the charting stuff, and, you know, I'd have to look into it. But like, the wrong part was doubling down and saying like, no, like, this is how it is. I just like, if you come out like CPOE, Patrick Mahomes, not one of the best CPOE quarterbacks. Okay, there's a problem then, because he's pretty damn accurate. And so like the real fun questions are why then.
But like, this happens, to bring it back to betting. This happens in betting all the time. Like there are I'll go through a full season and I might bet against a team 30 times, maybe in a hockey season or baseball back in the day, and I'd be like, fuck, like I'm wrong about this team. This model actually performs very well as a whole. It generally gets a lot of the things right.
Yep.
But I'm betting against the St. Louis Blues every night, or betting on them. They're terrible. My model cannot capture how terrible they are. I'm missing something here. I admittedly no longer have confidence in this number. I'm not going to bet them because I think something is wrong here. I agree with you. I think the problem is when you double down on the situation, right? And it's like, oh, all you guys, I didn't realize how infatuated everyone is with counting stats. It's like, no, like just come out and say, like, you know what? Our model does a very good job of capturing 90% of the players in the league, but there are going to be some outliers for X, Y, and Z reason. And I think that would have been a different way to approach it, because no model's going to get everything right. It's not going to happen.
Right. And the issue is going to be, and this is where I am going to turn it to kind of like the betting situation is like, you're going to take heat from the Seville people. You're going to take heat from other sharp bettors for anything you put out there. And that you're going to, like, he had a similar issue. He said Aaron Donald was a below average run defender and all this stuff. And like, I actually think it's interesting. Like, I thought his conclusion was, I learned a lot from that discussion. You're going to get reamed on by O-line Twitter. Same thing. Ben Baldwin posts his O-line, where he just takes the average of ESPN and PFF, and I'm trying to remember the third one. And like all the O-line Twitter, they get at, but I guarantee you, Ben has learned from those like times when he was getting ripped on. Like, to me, if you don't want the scrutiny, I don't know if you're going to be all that great at putting out public information, because the scrutiny is going to come. And the question is are you going to be able to learn from it? And if you have some humility to like, make fun of yourself a little bit or something like that. Like, I don't know, but to me, there's value in that feedback that I just don't necessarily know if it's fully being captured by people who are not willing to face it, or who say like, no, like, and this is, I think, what his perspective is like, he's incredibly bright and he's had access to this tracking data for far longer than a lot of us have had. And he's made good progress on some stuff. And so if I'm him, like, I understand the confidence, but I think in this case it was misplaced. And I wonder if he would have engaged in good faith with some of the, people who were going after him, whether there would have been a lesson learned or not.
It's really well said. And just on a personal level, as a bettor, I probably owe a lot of what I have to the internet trolls, so to speak, or the Sevilles or whatever, who came after me at one point or another and said, like, you're an idiot. I don't like the manner in which it's done. I've been very vocal about this before. I don't think you need to like demean someone or put them down unless you listen. There's people that are abrasive and naturally they're going to butt heads, and it is what it is. I think there's better ways to get the point across than being a complete dickhead about it. That's just me personally.
Yeah, but we don't get to choose how they, like that's who they are, and
right.
Like it's just you take the good with the bad in life, right? Like, and I blocked a few of them before, and like then you unblock them because you realize that they're the way, and that's the other thing. You're right about tact, but I also think the information is good, and if you're not trying to constantly evolve or look at like the weaknesses in your game, whether that be as somebody like me who's an analyst or people who are trying to bet professionally, like it's an interesting question. Like, I don't want to throw this back to you, but like there are people who are like, oh, I don't read anything until Friday. I want my whole like, are you somebody like that, or is it kind of to me? I feel like. I feel like all that information is important if properly processed.
So I consume tons over the course of the week. Now, I try not to let it affect my process and my decision making over the course of that week, because we could very easily be biased by something, right? And listen, for every football game, there's sharp guys that are going to have opinions one way and sharp guys that are going to have opinions the other way. No one's going to universally align on what this number is. Yep. So I just like to consume information generally. Like someone like Diggs, I don't like Diggs in the way that he handles himself, but I learn a lot from him generally. There's people that I don't like that I will read every tweet of theirs because I might pick up, like for me, I know I'm not the best sports bettor. I'll never be the best sports bettor. That's fine. But the goal is continuous improvement and staying on top of things. And there's little nuggets that you can find from different people. I don't really care about the predictions, honestly. Like someone, I listen to other shows with picks just out of like, what's the handicapping style, right? Yeah. How is this person breaking down a game? What are they doing? Are they mentioning a metric that might be very different than what I'm using? Why are they doing that? All of that stuff just gets the wheels turning in my head. So no, I'm not like a tune it all out type of guy. I honestly think that's a horrible strategy because you want to remain on like the pulse of the league that you're betting on.
I agree. And I think it's, and a lot of the great analysts I know in the league are, it's like funny. It's like, I can't send it. Well, I do send stray tweets. Let's be honest here. But like, I can't send a stray tweet about their team without getting like a message being like, hey, you're being unfair, like that kind of thing. And it's good. Like that feedback is important. And like, if I'm right, then that's fine. And if I'm wrong, then it's an opportunity to learn. But I do think that there are just so many opportunities. And I think, like I said, I've had my, Brian and I are friends and like, but we've also gone after each other about different things because, that we disagree about stuff. And I think that that's been valuable. I've learned a lot from him. And like, that was my only disappointment is like, I think there was an opportunity to learn there. And I think if you see somebody who is humble about building something that clearly took a lot of work and a lot of analytical infrastructure and, things that, machine learning things that a lot of people are not necessarily all that able to build. So you have certainly added value to the space in that way. I think you almost you dump all of it and then some by sort of like doubling down like that.
Yep, totally agree with that. I want to touch on a few more topics before we do get into our end game questions and scenarios here. What's also controversial in the space nowadays is quarterback valuation. Seems to be all over the place in the NFL nowadays. This week alone, I've probably seen a handful of quarterback takes that, a vein might have popped in my neck when I actually just read it. I saw Russell Wilson has been better this season than Patrick Mahomes, obviously off of that game. There was the Kurt Warner tweet about Brock Purdy and like people, you need to watch tape type of things. Like as if there's people that are evaluating Brock Purdy that have never watched tape on him before. There's so many. I could get to a million of them. What's the best way to go about valuing quarterbacks nowadays? It's a loaded question, but even for like someone who just simply looks at the surface stats, right? Like this is where I see some content creators, they're referencing like touchdown to interception ratio and passing yards per game and whatever. As someone who's more deeply rooted and invested in the football analytics space, what are some things that people don't realize are extremely important in measuring a quarterback's impact?
Well, I think you have to have so to get really nerdy about it, you have to be able to properly value the coach and the offensive line and the receivers. And, some of those are easy. So for example, like with a head coach or a coordinator, you can like use what are called a mixed effect model and come up with like the point spread that a offensive coordinator is worth, right? For example, like, and those things are really valuable. So all of that aside, to me, is the offense efficient when he plays football is the first question. So, because I know that there are a lot of quarterbacks like Justin Herbert, for example, like everybody wants to give him crap because, he has high profile losses and all that. But when you look at like expected points added, for the most part, those offenses are pretty efficient, right? And then you back out the fact that the coach isn't very good and all this stuff, and you can get there, right? Old school scouting, like we have access to a scouting service here at Sumer that we have ourselves. And like, that is really valuable data. Do I agree with the orderings? No, but it's really valuable data to see how people arrive at that. But beyond that, and I think this is really important because we all missed this on Russell Wilson. What the team asks the player to do has so much value from an informational standpoint. So I went through this thing last year where I was watching the Vikings. I grew up in Minnesota. My dad's a Vikings fan. And so I do like, and I was noticing at like all the end of games, they would not let Kirk Cousins throw. Like they were up by 7 and then they would, I'd have 1st and 10 and they go run, screen. and then they punt, and then they give up a touchdown, and Kirk would drive them into field goal range. Everybody's like, oh, look how amazing Kirk is. I'm like, if Kirk was amazing, right, they would just have him drop back and end the game with like 2 or 3 passes, right? The same way that Burrow did in the Kansas City game in December last year, where they just trust their quarterback. Like, and I'm not pretending to have the whole space filled here, but look at ways in which a team has a choice to trust their quarterback versus not trust them, and how often do they do it?
Interesting.
So CPOE, for example.
Yep.
Inspect the E, right? Inspect the kind of throws the team trusts the quarterback to make. Because CPOE is saying, given that, how good has he been? I think is sometimes the wrong question. It's, do they trust him to make this whole throw between the safety and the corner? And like, that has a lot of information packed into it.
Do you think that also applies to the quarterback depth chart per se? Like, a lot of times we get into situations where people are like, why is this guy still starting? Clearly the backup is better than them, type of situation. Backup comes in, they maybe have like a hot start, and then they just completely fall off the cliff as well. And we're like, oh, maybe he wasn't that great after all. To me, oftentimes people are like this team is insane. Like, why is this player starting? It's like, well, they're starting probably because the coaching staff believes this is the best available option.
And not to say that coaches are infallible or that information is perfect, but like, they have so much more information than we have. Like, they're there every single day. There's leadership aspects of it. Like, most of us didn't know that Russell Wilson like was starting to detach from the Seahawks and was starting to like want his own office and like, you know, not be a part of the team. And, you know, a lot of us also didn't see Kirk Cousins, who for most of his career has been a pariah on his own team, started to lean into what it meant to be a leader. And we saw that in the, you know, and who knows how much the documentary had an influence on that. But like, there are like these little things that like matter, and we don't have access to them. So we only get access to them as applied through how the team uses the player.
Yep. I want to end on one topic here that I think is interesting, and I haven't really heard discussed much before. I promise to the viewers and listeners there will be an Eric Eager Part 3 at some point in time. Maybe it'll be 2 years from now, but there's a million topics we can go through on NFL analytics. And because this stuff is constantly evolving, I do like to pick Eric's brain on this. I want to talk a little bit about self-scouting and how much of this happens in the NFL. Like, how much do teams try to understand their own flaws and their own tendencies when game planning for a game? Because we oftentimes only hear, and obviously no coach is going to publicly come out and be like, oh, we have a real weakness against this, we need to get that shored up. That's not something that you would see publicly said. It's more so around, we're facing this opponent, you know, maybe we can attack them through the air, whatever, that kind of stuff starts to leak. But how much of the actual game planning, and with you being in tune with how these teams sometimes game plan, or specific teams, do you think is self-scouting versus scouting the upcoming opponent?
I don't know if it's true about every single team, but like, for the most part, most of that is done in the bye week and then after the season, which is an interesting thing, right? Because I know a lot of people are, you know, one of the things that we got dinged for at PFF with me and George on the forecast, we always talk about what teams should do. And like, the real question is like, what our team's going to do. And as you know, if you're betting, there's some comfort in knowing that most teams are going to be pretty stable in what they're doing, smart or not smart. But it's not a lot. It's not as much. And I think is, even when you think about like player eval, it's not I think you'd be surprised at like, you know, how relatively, I'll just say this, like, they know more about the players they want to acquire than the players they have on their roster in some cases.
Our next week's episode is going to be a guest that goes by Antonino DeRosa, and he started in Magic cards, Magic the Gathering, game theory, strategy, going to tournaments where, you know, you had to prepare a deck for all the possible opponents that you might play, and like, what might this person do, what might this person do, but also, what do people think I'm going to do, type of situation. And to me, I don't know how much of this happens in the NFL, but I feel like there is a hidden edge. if I ever got a coaching job, I'll never be a head coach in the NFL. But if I ever did, so much of it would be internal reflection on how is this team going to game plan for us? What are our tendencies? And the reason I say this is because I watch a lot of tape on Mondays, typically speaking, right? And I'm not like a tape guy. I don't make my numbers based off of what I see, but I like to see if I can pick up on things. If I chart every single week what I think the Cowboys are going to run, whether it's just, let's say it's just a run and pass. And for those that don't know, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. I've actually done this before. And I will successfully pick what the Cowboys are going to do at a much higher level than other teams where I don't watch every single game and don't obsess over the team. And this is just my knowing of that organization. I would imagine if I'm able to do this and pick up on it, other teams are able to say, you know what, it's 2nd and 8. The Cowboys are very likely going to do this or whatever.
Well, at least in the same division, right? Which is why you see point spread compression in familiar games.
Right. Great point. And like why certain teams always play certain teams tough for some reason or another. We can't explain how the Commanders are always playing the Eagles close and then they look like garbage against every single other team. But I just feel like this is the next step. Like I yes, you obviously want to prepare for your opponent and everything you do. You want to know their tendencies. But to me, it's just as valuable to say, this is how this team is going to attack us. And we need to shore this up.
Well, also because you have the most control over who you are.
Yes.
True. I mean, you have no control over who the other team is, I mean, to a certain extent. So I think that is very smart. And, I mean, and this comes, Josh Hermsmeyer, one of my good friends who, started the whole defense doesn't matter, which is obviously wrong, but probably truer to first order than we'd like to think. It's like there are aspects of, like, controlling what you can actually control when the rest of the world is variance. Like, there's wisdom in that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is just like a random example, but for years, Bill Belichick was the guy that was just like going to take away the opposing team's best player. You got a star tight end, guess what? He's getting double teamed on every single play. That guy's not going to see the ball. And some teams just looked like shell-shocked when they played the Patriots of like, oh, we can't get our our wide receiver the ball. He's got like a man coverage with a safety over top of someone. And it's like, you had to have known this was coming. Like, don't get me.
This is the world we live in.
Right. So it's like, okay, what did these guys just watch 2 weeks of tape where the Patriots were taking the opposing running back out of the game and they thought, oh, the Patriots are just going to try to take our running back out of the game? And it's like, I'm simplifying it. I'm dumbing it down. There's way more to this than that. But I just feel like the chess game amongst coaches is where a significant edge can be had.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a little bit of, and this is the 4th down and 2-point conversion stuff too. There's a little bit of like, if we can't beat them straight up, we're cheating. And it's also why like you see how like other coaches are not that ready to call like Mike McDaniel a genius or back in the day, Chip Kelly. Like there wasn't a lot of like outward praise for those men, even though they were doing amazing things. And I think a lot of it is just like this scheme shouldn't matter so much. Our guys should be able to out execute their guys.
Yes.
And that's folly. Yeah, I think
that's ego driven.
It's a psychological thing.
It's ego driven. Like if every Sunday morning when I'm prepping for Pizza Buffet, I turn on the TV and I'm seeing Rex Ryan talk, right? And Rex Ryan was a coach in the league for a while. And his whole thing is like, I'll hear him say stuff like, I don't care that this team is number 1 against the run. I would line up and I'd try to shove it down their throat. I want to line up like a bunch of men, and you're the number 1 run defense in the league. I'm going to show you that you're not actually the number 1 run defense in the league. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking? Like, these guy coach games like this.
And for what?
Right.
For what? If
just
you lose the game by 3, but you outperform them, like, it's just like it doesn't make a ton of it's sort of like if a bettor was going to be like, look, I haven't been able to handicap Commanders games all year, but I'm going to continue to do it to prove something to myself. It's like all you're proving is that you're going to continue to get killed.
Right. The goal like for Rex Ryan, it's to win games. It's not to prove that you're more of a man and your team is tough to play against. At the end of the day, you're judged on wins and losses. So that always frustrates me. Appreciate the time, Eric. This is going to be the first time that you get to come on and do plus EV minus EV, because this segment was not there when we first did our episode in November of 2021. So doesn't have to be sports betting related, can be anything. Could be sports betting related, totally up to you. One thing you think is plus EV in life, one thing that you think is minus EV in life.
So one thing that's plus EV in life is discomfort.
Plus EV. Okay, expand.
Like, I don't think I've, you have seasons of life where you're like, I always think back to the difficult like months. Like college was pretty easy for me, but I had like 2 or 3 difficult months. Grad school, probably the first semester was really hard, and then everything else was fairly. But like I look back and I remember so much of the difficult times. I don't remember a ton of the way things were going well. And this entire interview, a lot of time, like most of what I've discussed is things I've gotten wrong. And the discomfort, or even like things I've gotten right, but I knew that there was something that was missing. And I think discomfort makes you sharper. I think that risk makes you sharper. I think that I do think that discomfort is a good thing.
Okay. I'm currently feeling some serious discomfort in my back, and I can tell you it's not a good thing.
Not a good thing. Yeah, that's probably different for sure. But maybe it'll get you know what?
I can get out and get a massage tomorrow and relax for an hour, so maybe it could turn into a positive at some point.
Exactly.
Minus EV.
Good call. Minus EV is athletic associations having 5th grade lacrosse games during Sunday afternoons. I'm sitting here on Sunday. I watch 15 minutes of the 1 o'clock games. I go to my daughter's lacrosse game. I'm sitting in the chair watching my phone. I'm a bad father. Like, you're making me be a bad father, right? Like, you're setting expectations that are low to the point of analytics there. And then at the end of a 5th grade lacrosse game, you act like you're Dan Campbell and you hold them for like another 20 minutes. And I'm just like, you're just making me out to be an asshole. Like, it's like I'm the parent standing there with the chair, just like staring at the coach, like, the Chiefs start in 5 minutes, man.
Let's move it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's negative EV. I tried to think of something more clever, but that was like only thing on my mind this week.
No, I get it. I can see how that would be super frustrating as a parent. It's why I can't have kids. I'll be completely honest with you. I would be a terrible father. I can't miss an NFL Sunday. I just can't. I could not do it. As Mike Singletary once said, can't win with him. Can't do it. Can't do it. I'm not going to ask you our final question. You've answered it before. You've answered it. This is like it's just very redundant. His name is Eric Eager. Check out Sumer Sports, sumersports.com. There's actually some pretty cool tables on there if you're interested in looking at stats, QB analytics, different position groups. Honestly, you can get lost in it. I'd highly recommend you check it out. Sumersports.com. For those of you who enjoyed this interview, take 2 seconds, smash that like button down below. It helps YouTube understand that people like this content, and it filters it out to other sports bettors in the space. So smash that like button, subscribe here on Circles Off, and also hit that share button. If you thought this was a good interview, interesting football analytics, you want to get it out there on Twitter, wherever you deal with your friends that deal with football, WhatsApp, Telegram, all of it. Hit that share button. This has been episode number 126 of Circles Off. We'll catch everyone next week.